Goes On Media. This is Coming Out Stories. It's a podcast about one of the most important conversations of your life. I'm Emma Goswell. In this episode, we're going to hear from Carl Austin-Behan. It really is an extraordinary story that takes you on a proper roller coaster.
I guess I really knew I was gay I knew I was different from the age of 7. And it was that sort of period of growing up, going through school, where you sort of felt you were different from the other people in the class. Primary school and junior school, going into secondary school, there was encounters with other lads that I was with at school.
When you say encounters, you mean sort of romantic encounters as a child?
Both romantic and a little bit sexual, even at that age. And it was strange because people always say that, people experiment. And I get that completely, and that was something that I was doing from the age of 7. And I suppose it's that thing, isn't it? It's your body, and it's about the experimenting of the body. Yeah. And for some reason, I never really felt attracted to girls, but I did feel attracted to the lads that were in my classes as growing up.
So they were reciprocating. Was there any element of bullying or judging you?
As for the bullying and judging, I think it was no different than whether you were... Because I was quite a chubby kid at school anyway. So whether you were chubby kid, whether you had glasses, whether you were a bit effeminate, it was the sort of general sort of name-calling, the typical sort of name-calling, rather than it be a case of the vicious bullying aspect. I was a bit of a loner at school, as in the fact that I didn't really have a group of friends that I mixed with constantly. I'd sort of dip in and dip out of different people, and that sort of was the way right from sort of primary school, infant school, junior school, secondary school, and it was. I mean, there's a core of people that I still keep in touch with now, and we've had a lot of conversations since about the fact of how I didn't fit in one sense, but then it was easy for me to sort of fit in with a lot of other groups.
Was there any point where you actually came out at school then?
Not at school. I tried to sort of speak to my mum when I was about 12, and again, my mum was just like, "Oh, it's a phase you're going through. All boys go through this." So I just took it that was part and parcel of a phase of life I was going through. And then as sort of school continued, sort of 14, 15, I was engaging in sexual acts with people at school, and also having emotions with people. So I knew I was different because no one ever spoke about being gay, or no one educated you about sexuality at school. I remember our sex education class was a cucumber with a condom, and that was basically it. And I think the conversation was more about why your ball bag was saggy rather than anything else. Do you know what I mean? There was no there was nothing that sort of gave you any sort of sexual education.
And just because this was the 1980s?
It was, yeah. I mean, I went through secondary school, 83 and left in 88. I would say, thankfully, just before Section 28 came in, but it didn't really affect us in that sense anyway, because no one really spoke about it. But then as I was like 15, 16, there was that period where we had a massive, the HIV/AIDS epidemic was hitting our screens. And I remember absolutely sort of beside myself, seeing these images and then thinking, I'm going to die of this disease, and I didn't want to be gay. I didn't want to have this. I just didn't want to be in that situation because, one, I was scared of dying, but also I felt that because it was such a taboo subject, no one spoke about it, and you had all the media sort of constantly about the fact of this was a gay disease and people were going to die from it.
So you felt shame about your sexuality?
Yeah, I did. At that age, I did feel ashamed, and I tried to sort of think it was a phase I was going through. I remember, again, trying to tell my mum, and my mum again was telling me it's a phase I'm going through. And then I ended up sort of trying to see a girl. I went through the motions for a number of years. And I remember, because I joined the Air Force when I was 19, and I'd always wanted to be a fireman as a kid. And then when I tried to apply, but you had to be 21 at the time for Greater Manchester. I went over to see my brother in Cyprus, and because he was in the Air Force, and I realised in the RAF that they had a fire service, and I saw the sort of lifestyle that he was leading, and I just thought, this would be a great way. I really want to get involved here. So I applied when I was 17 and a half, and it took me 18 months, and I got confirmation on the 20th of April 20th of March, that I'd been accepted to join up on the 2nd of April. No one knew. So I literally had to tell my mum, tell my dad, my family that I was going in the Air Force.
So you had to come out as enlisting rather than coming out as gay?
Yeah.
And you certainly couldn't have done the two at the same time, could you then?
Well, no, because it was illegal at the time. And I remember...
Yes, it was illegal to be in the Army or the Air Force or in the forces as a gay, openly gay man. It was illegal.
It was illegal, and that didn't get passed until 2000, but it was legal. And I remember my mum saying, but you can't. And I was like, why? And she says, because you told me that you're gay. I was like, but Mum, you've always told me it's a phase I'm going through. So it was a bit like a sort of throwback in a way. And I remember my brother, I've got one brother was in the Air Force and one brother had applied for the Air Force and didn't get accepted. And they just thought it was crazy, me going in the Air Force, because one, they didn't think I'd stand the discipline, and two, they just didn't think it was for me. So in part of it, it was also a way of me trying to prove them wrong.
And was your dad around at this point?
Yeah, my dad was around. Me and my dad weren't that close, and he was fine with it, no issue.
Had you ever mentioned your sexuality to your dad, though?
No, because even during the periods that I tried to come out to my mum and tell my mum, she'd always made it clear that not to tell my dad. And my dad had very bigoted views, even when it came to racial issues. You know, I remember going on holiday to Newquay and seeing a friend that I was at school with who was mixed race. I remember talking to her, and my dad sort of threw off the handle, why am I speaking to her, and gave a lot of obscenities. And that was the mentality of people back in the 80s, you know, when it came to sort of people's colour, race, gender. So
you didn't think he was going to be tolerant?
No, I certainly didn't think he was going to be tolerant.
So talk to us about what it was like being in the Air Force then, as a gay man, but keeping it closeted, I guess.
Yeah, definitely keeping it closeted. And I was definitely leading a double, if not a triple life, because when I was doing basic training, it was fine. And yeah, still have feelings for people, and you know, you do get attracted to people in that sense. But when I was sort of going through that whole sort of period, and sort of because I was a fireman in the Air Force, it was quite a macho image, especially with the Air Force as well. And there'd been a couple of rumours that people sort of commented on, and so then what happened was I then started seeing this girl. She was engaged at the time to another lad, but we just sort of became good friends, and then the good friendship went further than that. And she fell pregnant with me.
Wow.
When I was 20. So then I thought, oh, right, okay, you know, what's going on? And at the same time, when I was coming back to Manchester, I was seeing lads when I was back here. So she became pregnant. On my 21st birthday, we got engaged. And then probably about 6-7 weeks later, she had a miscarriage. And I thought then that was a sign, that was something telling me, because I didn't feel happy in that relationship. I felt like I was going along with this relationship just to sort of do what society said was right.
You had a desperate need to be accepted and be normal, for want of a better word, didn't you, by the sounds of it?
Yeah, because all we'd seen is the fact that the big HIV/AIDS epidemic was going on in sort of the late 80s, early 90s. I just wanted sort of family to sort of appreciate or value who I was as a person. Yeah. I didn't really know what my sexuality was because of the fact that you weren't able to be yourself. And it was a tricky sort of period of life. So when I was coming home at weekends or during the shifts, I was seeing people, and it was horrible because at that time we didn't have apps like you've got now. You didn't have dating sites or anything like that.
It was go down the gay bars.
It was, for me, it wasn't a case of being able to go down the gay bars, because if people knew I was in the Air Force and saw me in the gay bars, so for me, unfortunately, I ended up going through a bit of the cottaging and the cruising. You know, I'm not embarrassed about that, but it was something that, it was the only way of people could express themselves at that time, I think, because it had to be kept a secret, because the fact that you've pointed out earlier, the fact that it was illegal, and you would get kicked out, you would get dismissed, you could go to military prison for at least 6 months before being kicked out.
So you were taking a lot of risks, and in the end, you did get found out, didn't you?
Well, yeah, because then what happened was, as sort of time carried on, my head was in bits in one sense, because I was coming back seeing, I was when I was in the Air Force, I was seeing a girl who was, again, seeing a girl to try and fit in with what the Air Force expected. And when you'd go out, you'd end up being a lad at the time, and then you'd come back and I'd end up seeing a lad back in Manchester, and yeah, taking a lot of risks. And then what happened was, I went over to Ascension Island, which is between here and the Falklands, and I was stationed there for 9 months. And while I was there was a girl that I became again friendly with, and you know, we really bonded, and then I suppose at that time it was a case of I was then questioning, was I bisexual? Was it a case of, did it matter what people were, whether they were male or female? And it was about affections, and it was about love, and it was about emotions rather than just a sexual encounter. So I think that was another big thing of the whole questioning about my sexuality. And then while I was there was another lad that I got friendly with, and then we started having sexual encounters. And then there was a rumour going round about me and him while I was still supposedly seeing this girl. Anyway, I came back to do the London Marathon, so they flew me back. So I was doing it for charity. So they flew me back, I came back for a long weekend, and some of them rumours had come back to the UK. So I was petrified. So when I went back, I literally sort of completely threw myself back into this relationship with this girl as if it was the best thing in the world to try and cover up a secret. And when I eventually came back from Ascension Island, I realised then when I came back to Manchester, because I was off for about a month afterwards, I realised, what the heck am I doing? It was a case of I needed to be myself. I needed to accept who I am. At the same time, I was stationed to Honington down in Bury St Edmunds, and I'd just got my promotion through. So I'd just got the Queen's Commendation, CNC's Commendation. So I'd got these awards for the Air Force. I just got promoted. I was now at Honington, and I was at that stage where I thought, no, I need to come out properly. I need to be myself. So anyway, in the November '96, I told my mum again, and my mum again, it's a phase you're going through. At the same time, my mum was diagnosed with breast cancer. So I was all emotional with that. And so then I told my brothers, and my brothers were very much like, well, one brother, David, he was like really upset, but then it was just like, I thought you were going to tell me something, it was something serious, and it was, it was nothing to worry about. My other brother, who was in the Air Force, complete different opposite view, and it was a case of, well, you can't tell anyone that I know, because if I know that you're gay and you're still in the Air Force and I'm in the Air Force, I would have to report you. And that's your own brother telling you that.
That must have hurt.
That did hurt. That did, because I certainly wouldn't have expected that. But then I decided that I had to tell my dad, and my mum was adamant, don't tell your dad, he'll kick you out. And I was like, he can't really kick me out, because what can he kick me out of? I don't live here.
Yeah.
So then I did tell my dad, and it was probably one of the very first times that I remember for many, many years that he gave me a hug, told me that he loved me, and just said, look, son, no one ever told me how to live my life, but just be careful and just be safe. And that was the way that he dealt with it.
That must have been a huge weight off his shoulders.
It was, but the problem I then had was my mum found that really difficult, because then I think my mum went through a stage where she felt that she knew my dad and she didn't know my dad at all, because she was expecting a complete different reaction from my dad. And I think she found it hard, the fact that my dad was so tolerant, considering she'd always put this barrier there. And I think she thought that, why hadn't I come out earlier, or why, you know what I mean, that there could have been a lot of things going through my life that might have been different if we'd have had this conversation 6-7 years ago. But
you have the conversation when you have the conversation. I guess you don't regret not doing it earlier, or do you? Not at all, because I look at what I achieved in the Air Force. I got the British Humane Society Bronze Award for bravery. I got good show awards. I got mentioned the Queen's birthday on the list. I loved the Air Force. I still love the Air Force. If there'd have been an opportunity earlier, I'd have gone back in the Air Force. Best times of my life. I loved it. But you ultimately left. What were the circumstances with you leaving then? Well, because I'd told my family, and then they sort of accepted it, and
I then felt more comfortable to be able to come out into Manchester, come to bars, come out. So I came to a few of the bars in Manchester. I think one of the very first bars I ever went in was New York, and I just loved it. It was like the best night of my life. It's strange, isn't it, when the very first time you do go into a gay bar. I'd been into Manto previous, but not really sort of. It was just a bar, but I knew gay people. But you know, to sort of express yourself, that was my first real time. And then sort of I started to see more people in the village, go out more on the scene. Went to Cruise 101, and I met a lad there. We started a relationship. We'd only been seeing each other, it was probably the February time. But I told a couple of people in the Air Force that I was gay. Because of the work I was doing when I was in the fire service, you'd be sharing a room with people when you're on shift. So I told them out of courtesy, and they were fine with it. A couple of strange questions. One of the lads was like, I don't get what you do. I was like, what do you mean, what do I do? It's like, well, when I'm at home at weekend, he says, you know, we cuddle up on the couch, me and my girlfriend, we watch TV. What do you do? I was like, exactly the same. I said, I don't get what you mean, what don't I do? Or what do we do? So it was a bit like, lovely guy, but if they've never come across someone who's gay, and do you know what, and the weird thing was, I think majority of the people at that time didn't know a gay person.
So that's almost harder to come out. People don't understand it.
Well, yeah, and also at that time we didn't have role models on TV. The only people we had on TV was your Larry Graysons and your Julian Clarys, which were very camp, effeminate people anyway. So there was no sort of role models. There was no one there that people could sort of focus on to sort of think that, you know, that was what you were. And again, so when we had those conversations, they were fine, and then we didn't really discuss it. It was, you know, it was just that thing that because I was known as Aussie, so it was a case like, yeah, Aussie's just Aussie. Do you know what I mean? It was never really talked about then.
But ultimately, there wasn't a happy ending to your Air Force career, was there?
Well, no, because once I'd started seeing this lad, he wanted us to spend more time together. So he actually phoned the Air Force and told them that I was gay, and then told me that he'd told them. But after an Easter weekend, so I was driving back to the Air Force, and I first of all went and spoke to my sergeant, told him what had happened and what was going on, and then I got called into OC Admin's headquarters, officer commanding office, and in there was three senior RAF officers, and they just sat me down and were like, SAC Austin, we have a question. Okay, do you know why you're here? And I just pretended I didn't know what was happening. And then they said, we need to ask you, do you have homosexual tendencies? And you know what? And it was that minute where I could have quite easily have said no. And I firmly believe that would have been, well, thank you very much, no problem. Because, as I say, I'd got all these awards in the Air Force. I also did a lot of charity work for SAFA, which was Sailors, Soldiers and Airmen's Association. And I had a lot of people's personal details. So they knew that I was quite an emotional person in the fact of the things that I'd covered. But also in that split second in my head, I thought, is it now that I have to be myself and be honest and true? And it was the latter. I literally just burst into tears. And this was all within a split second. Burst into tears and confirmed that, yes, I was. As I say, because it was illegal at the time, they could have quite easily have still put me into military prison for 6 months. However, they suspended me for 6 months and sent me back to Manchester, sent me back home, because at that particular time it was originally going through the European Parliament, and this was 97. So this was 1997, and as I say, still illegal to be within the armed forces. So during that period, I remember them getting the sergeant up, and he was like, look, we've all known, but we're not going to admit that we've all known. But he causes no threat, he causes no issue to anybody. I've got an exemplary record. The one thing that does disappoint me with the Air Force was the wording on, for me to be dismissed, was incompatible. So I was incompatible to service life. And I think that was the only thing that I have a grievance with the wording incompatible, because to me incompatible is like a light bulb. It's either bayonet or screw. And that's not a person. That shouldn't be someone's gender identity as incompatible.
I can see, actually, reflecting, that you're almost getting quite emotional about it, looking back and thinking about that time.
Yeah, because in one sense it seems like it was only yesterday. But then if we think it's not even 20 years ago, that it's been legalised. You know, it's 21 years ago since being kicked out, but it's not even 20 years ago since it's been legalised. And I think we should be grateful of what we've achieved and what we've done. But then what was strange from that is I was suspended for 6 months, and then I remember writing to Tony Blair at the time, and then it got sent on to different people. But because they were the rules and regulations, I understood that completely, and I took that on board. And then during that period, I then just got a bit of extra work, doing a bit of TV extra work, a bit of modelling, a bit of promotion work. I went to work for Asda over in Bury, and then sort of moved over to Hume. And during that period, I applied for Great Manchester Fire Service. Now, the strange thing with that is, even though there was gay people in the fire service, it wasn't really talked about. I was the first openly gay person to join the fire service. Wow. The problem they had was, at this stage back in 1998, was they didn't have any diversity or equality understanding, really. So then I started my basic training over at Thomas Street here in Manchester, and I was asked on the very first day not to make my sexuality known because it may disrupt the training. And I managed it for about 2 weeks, and then I just felt like, because sometimes you'd go home at weekend and come back, and I just felt like when people were asking questions, I couldn't say that what I'd done all weekend. You know, I'd been to Paradise, or I'd done this, or I'd done that. So then I ended up sort of telling the lads who I shared a room with, and then I ended up telling everyone else. There's about 24 people on the course, so I told them all, and they were all fine about it in a sense. It was a case of, I think they valued the fact of I was being honest with them. The officers went absolutely ballistic. We ended up going swimming over in Miles Platting, and then one of them, with a bit of banter, one of the guys made a comment about, because we had floats, and one of the guys made a comment about, should it not be a pink float? And I just, you know, I gave some banter back, and they went ballistic about it. We all got sort of brought back to the training centre, given a rollicking about the fact that we're not allowed to make any comments, the fact that you're not allowed to talk about this or say that because someone could take offence. They just didn't know how to handle something that wasn't in their normal sort of surroundings. So then, when we'd finished the training course, everyone else got posted to sort of about 20 miles away from where they lived. And that was the normal thing, because being a fireman, what they didn't want you to do is work in the area that you live in case you come across an incident where you may know someone. Anyway, I ended up getting put, I was living in Hume, I ended up getting put at White Watch, Moss Side, which is literally around the corner. And this was, it had the first Asian fireman, the first black fireman, so obviously the first gay fireman.
For Manchester?
For Greater Manchester, yeah. And it was like the dysfunctional watch in the nicest possible.
In their eyes.
Yeah. But then, because of the diversity and equality that they threw in there, it was a husband and wife team. The guy worked at Moss Side, and the wife was at headquarters. And because they knew someone who was gay, that gave them the equality strand branding. I managed it for about 18 months, and I just didn't like it. I just really didn't. I was going to work crying. And I joined the fire service for the wrong reasons. I joined because I felt that I'd let people down. And I remember because I was doing 2 days, 2 nights, 4 off, so I was working in between, and I set up a promotions company. I remember one of the firemen turning around and saying, when I said I was going to leave, it's like, don't just leave. He says, what you should do is go off sick, and then after 3 months they'll come to you, ask you why you've gone off sick, and then you just need to say that someone made a homophobic comment. And then what they'll do is they'll give you a big payoff, and you'll still get your pension.
It's a bit duplicitous, though.
Well, I just thought, I don't want to live my life like this, where you know, I'd gone from getting kicked out of the Air Force to joining the fire service to not being able to be myself, and I just felt that it's just going to get even worse. So that was the reason why I just thought, no, this is me, clean slate.
So you left.
Yeah, so I left, and that was in '99. At the same time, there was a competition that was UK based, Mr. Gay UK. That I came across. So, Mr. Gay UK, it is a sort of a beauty pageant contest, and previously the people that I'd seen in it were sort of your bodybuilders, your dancers, you know, the good bodies, and it not necessarily great things up there, but I actually thought about this competition. I actually thought, wherever the normal gay is, there was no role models again. It was all very stereotypical muscle Marys, hairdressers, dancers that went in for it. So in '99 I went in for it, and I won Mr Gay Manchester, and then overall I came second for Mr Gay UK in '99, and then I went for it. Didn't have it in 2000, but then I went for it again in 2001. And what I really wanted to do there, because I'd looked into it more, for me it was more about the fact that there was no representation from normal gay people. And when you look at places like Manchester, Brighton, Birmingham, London, we had a gay scene. We had people there that people could just fit in. But then where was the people to represent the people over in Worksop or in Derby or in Sheffield? And I felt really passionate about the fact that they needed representation. So then I really went for the competition again, but this time it was like a phone vote. So it was the first time I'd done a phone vote. So what I did was I went to different Pride events. I went speaking to people. I wanted to know what they wanted, or who they felt was representative of the gay community.
Because it was about representing the community.
Yeah, and for me, when the competition was around, I didn't have the best body, but I could speak to people, and I felt passionate about the fact of it need representation. And I just felt the fact that, I'd come from the Air Force, I'd done normal jobs, I'd gone into the fire service, and I felt that I could actually represent the community in a different way.
And obviously the public thought the same as well, because you actually went on to win. Yeah,
the competition, the final was held in Manchester and in 2001, and it was great to sort of win it on the main stage in Manchester Pride, and I had over 60% of the votes out of all 23 of us, and I felt that was a real sort of plus point, the fact that people they voted for me personally, and my family were there, which was great to sort of have them. We've come a long way in that sort of 3 or 4 year period. Even my brother that had said not to tell anyone that I was gay came with his wife.
It must have felt like the happiest day of your life, I imagine, after getting kicked out of the Air Force to then standing on the stage at Manchester Pride and winning Mr Gay UK.
Yeah, it did. I felt immensely proud, and at that particular point it was probably one of the best days of my life, and the fact that you've been recognised. And it wasn't about the beauty pageant side of it. I think it was purely because of the fact that going out and speaking to people and becoming an advocate. And I think one of the things that once being kicked out of the Air Force, I think that was where my passion and my strengths came for being an advocate and for representing our community.
What I love about your story is the fact that you've gone through some really tough times, but it really is a case of it does get better, because not only were you Mr Gay UK, you went on to become the Mayor of Manchester.
Yeah, I got into politics in around about 2005 because I felt that there was little things that you'd moan about, the bins and all that sort of stuff. But then when I got elected and I became a councillor, and then as soon as I came on the council, I realised that we'd never had, in that whole period of having a Lord Mayor of Manchester, we'd never actually had any representation of someone who was openly gay. Yeah. So I put myself forward, and people were like, but you normally have to be on the council for 30, 35 years, 65, 70 plus. And I was like, well, no, that needs to change. It's like, we may have had a gay Lord Mayor in the past, but certainly not someone open or out about it. So when I then sort of put myself forward, in 14, 15, first of all, and the person that got it got 42 votes, I got 41. So I realised that actually some of the councillors thought that there could be a time for change. Anyway, the following year, I put myself forward, got 58 votes against 32. And I'll be honest, I think some people voted for me to see me fail. But I literally went out there, and it was about representing the LGBTQ plus community. And
I remember you were going to events every day, weren't you? You'd go to the opening of anything just to represent. Yeah.
Exactly, and people you can make little comments and jokes about the fact of I would turn up, but no, and it was about representation. It was about the fact of this was now a situation when I got elected as Lord Mayor. I remember the council's press office wouldn't put in their initial thing about me being openly gay. Because what they didn't want to do was someone to then question, well, if you're saying that he's the first openly gay, who else was gay in the past? But I did an article with the Manchester Evening News, and they ran this brilliant story and literally covered everything and showed all the pictures from Mr Gay UK. And I think one of the things that was great over that period as Lord Mayor, it was all about equality, diversity and inclusion. But being able to go in speaking into schools, speaking into businesses, being invited to so many different things where the conversation would never have come up. Even going to mosques, going to synagogues, breaking the fast. And I remember breaking the fast over in Cheetham for Ramadan. And I think I put a tweet out. The Guardian picked that up and then ran a full story about Manchester's first openly gay Lord Mayor being welcomed by the Imam. You know, it was all things like that that just broke down so many barriers.
Yeah. One of my favourite moments was watching you lead the procession at Manchester Pride and tell everyone what you were wearing for people that weren't there that day.
Well, the great thing for that was when I became Lord Mayor, obviously the robes are red. And it's traditional that they're red. However, being a Lord Mayor, it should be black. In the real world, it should be black. But yes, we have red robes. But then I managed to get it for Manchester Pride that I had made some pink robes. And what I loved about that was, if we look at how things can move on, if we think about 2001, doing my whole Mr Gay UK thing, I walked the Pride Parade and I was on that main stage wearing a pair of hot pants and a sash. To then, 15 years later, wearing pink robes, leading the parade, with the chain of office, being the first citizen of Manchester representing the city. And I just think that goes to show that anybody can do anything that they aspire to do.
That was the extraordinary story of Carl Austin-Behan. Massive thank you for him for sharing his story and taking time to talk to us. Please do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. We'd also love to hear from you on Twitter. You can find us there at Come Out Stories. I'm Emma Goswell, and Coming Out Stories is a What Goes On media production. Next time you'll hear from Lucia and Angela.
I had nowhere to live, so I lived for quite a long time on the streets with other young gay people that had run away from home for the same reasons I did.